The next presentation starts from these verbal conversations to written memories. And the next speaker is Stella PELŠE from the Latvian Institute of Art History. And the presentation title is Artist Personality in Latvian Art Historical Monographs since the turn of the 21st century. Please, Stella.
The beginnings of the present paper date back to an earlier piece in collected articles titled Personība, Mākslas, procesos, Personality in the Processes of Art. That article on the interpretation of personality in so-called artists' monographs in Latvia spans the period from the early 20th century till the late Soviet times. The shifting conceptions of the artist back then ranged from the romantic genius and sufferer to the healthy art worker expressing the national idea, later succeeded by the member of the Soviet period's progressive stream of Latvian art. During the whole history of the monographic tradition in Latvia, it had somewhat oscillated between the belletrist or ideological restrictions and serious catalogue raisonné type research. In the late 1980s, ideological lip services to the Soviet regime gradually petered out, leaving faithful studies of nature enriched by various formal values as the main criterion of the mature artist's personality. Now it seems enough time has passed to prompt a look at the most recent history, which has been certainly quite productive, and see if there are possibly new problems and hindrances in the field instead of the long-forgotten old ones. The 1990s can be seen as a period of gradual adaptation to a new situation. The free market conditions replacing Soviet time state patronage along with sudden financial security, censorship, and outdated technological methods. This decade saw a comparatively small number of substantial editions. Among the most important contributions of the 1990s, one can mention such books as Jānis Rozentals by art historian Inta Pujāte, 1991, Marta Skulme Tēlniecība, 1992, by art historian Ruta Čaupova, and Jānis Roberts Tilbergs, 1996, by art historian Māris Brancis. Jānis Rozentals is a sort of pictorial album-type edition on the early 20th century forefather of Latvian National School of Painting. But the extensive text, chronology of the artist's life and the synoptic table approximates it to a monograph. Jānis Roberts Tilbergs is an exhaustive publication on this academic realist artist based on archival studies. At the same time, the work retains a laudatory tone despite the author's declared faithfulness to documentary evidence, avoiding subjective improvisations, and objectiveness and neutrality. The monograph on the modernist sculptures, Marta Skulme, provides a certain link to the interwar period conceptions of the artist as expressor of certain national spirit, in this case primordial sense of plasticity. After the restoration of independence, some prominent Soviet period art historians also managed to cast off most of ideological ballast and produce extensive fact-based studies on particular artists, such as Skaidrīte Cielavas book on stage designer Jānis Kūga, 1992, or Rasma Lāces work on the grand-style figural painter of the interwar period, Augusts Annus. The small-size series mazā mākslas encyclopedia or small encyclopedia of art, along with short introductions to styles like Gothic, Renaissance, Impressionism or Symbolism, also included concise overviews on several noted Latvian artistic personalities. However, the project came to an end well before all significant topics had been covered. The first decade of the 21st century stands out by a remarkable boom in the genre of art historical monographs in Latvia, now free from any state-imposed ideology and also fostered by the digital revolution, allowing for a new level of print quality. At the same time, boundaries of the monographic genre have become increasingly vague and hard to define, in various proportions embracing the elements of pictorial album, collected articles, complete catalogue of works, or even exhibition catalogue. One has to bear in mind that not every book focused on particular artist will be discussed in the present paper, as their number is too great and could be possibly dealt with just in a thorough article. Most of the publications of interest have come from the specialized publishing house Nepotnes, already mentioned here yesterday, the founding of which in 1997 raised the field of art publications to a new level. However, some art galleries have launched impressive publications too, mostly album-type pictorial editions. A number of commercial publishers also have issued books on artists, either their own autobiographic accounts or those by art historians, as well as purely pictorial editions, but these are largely meant for general audience with comparatively less interest in specific art historical matters. A substantial number of comprehensive thick hardcover volumes that have appeared since 2000 are largely focused on Latvia's artists of the first half of the 20th century, especially those influenced by modernist idioms. Their output was clearly underestimated, distorted, explained away, or rendered in awkward terminology during the Soviet times. The prevalent approach has been to view the artist's personality in the wider artistic context. The links with neighboring national schools of art have been prioritized. At the same time, social context has been largely minimized as just one factor among many, which is understandable after the long period of enforced emphasis on sociological explanations. Part of these monographs was authored by a single scholar who has spent many years researching the life and work of that particular personality. Traditional chronological principle is usually observed, mixing biographical data with analysis of art. One example of this thorough monographic trend is the volume on the legendary modernist trailblazer Jāzeps Grosvalds from 2006, who studied in Paris before the First World War. Art historian Eduards Kļaviņš has based his account on a vast amount of preserved family material and detailed diaries. One can agree with another art historian Imants Landsmanis statement in a review that this book has, I quote, ideally balanced relationships between the life story and art and its assessment, end quote. Finally, allowing the individual to emerge from earlier vagueness, contradictions and dogmatic art historical conclusions. Groswald's iconic images of riflemen and war refugees have been recognized as canonical values before, but the artist himself for the first time has emerged as a personality able to embrace a wide variety of seemingly incompatible traits in his art, like refinement and force, lightness and dramatism, cosmopolitanism and national tradition, old masters and modern trends, sensuality and conceptual ideas, etc., thus leaving a lasting legacy attractive to this day. Another obvious case of a blind spot in Latvian art history has been that of the painter Johann Walter, an artist of mixed German-Latvian background, whose early period in St. Petersburg and Latvia until 1906 has been relatively well documented under a Latvianized name Jānis Valters, but little was known about his later career in Dresden and Berlin. Art historian Christiana Ābele, in her comprehensive monograph, has successfully deconstructed deep-seated traditions of monoethnic approach using a vast amount of artworks, archival findings, evidence collected from the artist's relatives and disciples abroad, and other material. Walter's theoretical views are also dealt with, revealing a logical development from the delicate early 20th century Impressionist landscapes and genre scenes to later individual versions of Cézannism and Expressionism. Art historian Dace Lamberga, whose work on classical modernism in Latvian painting has gained wide acclaim and also translated into French and Estonian, has authored several monographs on modernist artists, the most substantial being those on the expressive synthesizer of modernist trends Jēkabs Kazaks and lyrical portrait master Valdemārs Tone. These books successfully convince the reader that all available materials have been gathered and truthfully reported. Passages on biographical events and formal analysis of works are mixed up with statements by contemporaries, admirers, writers, artists, researchers, and critics. Densely packed quotes and wide excursuses into historical background create a wide panoramic view of empirical facts without enforcing any specific narrow reading of the artist upon the reader. Inclusion of various colorful episodes at times approximates Lamberg's works to Giorgio Vasari's tradition of lives of the artists. The voice of the author seems to disappear at times, but the quality of, quote, healthy post-Soviet empiricism, end quote, that Edvards Kļaviņš has detected in her volume on classical modernism applies to her artists' monographs as well. The equally extensive monograph on the peculiar outsider Kārlis Padaks by Jānis Kalnačs is also a result of long research years with numerous smaller publications serving as preparatory background. The book manages to unite somewhat incompatible aspects, a fascinating, almost crime story type, biographical narrative, and contextual analysis of artworks, reconstructing the life of a brilliant draughtsman who in his pen and ink drawings captured prostitutes, addicts, and disabled war veterans, and imaginary figures not well accepted in either Latvian Latvia of the 1930s or the Soviet Latvia that followed. Among other recent meticulously reconstructed stories of life and art, the book on Kārlis Brensāns by art historian Marita Bērziņa can also be mentioned. The creative biography of the versatile personality, painter, stained glass artist, draughtsman, pedagogue, and researcher of painting technologies, in this volume acquires convincing specificity despite some minor inaccuracies, according to reviewer Christiana Ābele. If the protagonists of all above-mentioned books were at least known in Latvian art history, even if insufficiently or distortedly interpreted, stunning new discoveries have also happened, resulting in a thick monograph on someone with almost no reputation on Latvia's artistic scene whatsoever. The parallel editions in Latvian and English titled Kustība, Visvaldes Ziediņš, and Movement, Visvaldes Ziediņš by Ieva Kulakova-Kalniņa, were published in connection with the artist's exhibition, but can be considered fully fledged monographs. Visvalds Ziediņš did not obtain academic education. His life dates are 1942-2007. He worked in his provincial native town of Liepāja as a theatrical set and store windows designer, at times showing works in local exhibitions, but never entered the wider art scene. When his legacy came to light after the artist's death, his free plays with collages and ready-mades in the spirit of Dada and Fluxus clearly counter the assumption that non-conformism was virtually non-existent in Latvian art. It just should not be narrowed down to open confrontation with the system, which is really almost absent and does not apply to Ziediņš either. Kalniņa, who has researched phenomena of non-official art before, has chosen for this monograph the rarer monographic model of dealing with life and works separately that was sometimes used in earlier periods, particularly in the interwar Latvia. The main focus is on the analysis of works, complemented by a comparatively short biographical sketch. Materials like not just artworks but also manuscripts, letters and diaries have provided a basis for partly thematic, partly chronological or genre-based chapters. This structure is largely derived from the work's content or the artist's driving interest. Parallels with contemporary Western art world are widely invoked. The artist's personality emerges as defined by perpetual movement, able to recreate the known Western artistic trends anew in local conditions. Abstractionism, surrealism, pop art, fluxus and other movements, most often conflicting and or consecutive in their countries of origin, acquire new localized and synthesized manifestations. Smaller size publications and recently discovered outsiders who abstained from the official Soviet art scene to various degrees were, for instance, the book on Adolf Zārdiņš by Ludmila Pestova. This artist has lived and worked in seclusion since the 1930s, creating often erotic female imagery, influenced by various classical as well as modernist impulses. The catalogue, Erika Gulbe, Glasnost of Paintings, presents a woman artist cultivating a Fauve-inspired Penteli idiom under the gloomiest pressure of socialist realism. The book Leonids Āriņš by art historian Gundik Cēbere explores another significant outsider based in a provincial town, who was one of the most consistent followers of Henri Matisse in Latvia. The monographs on artists Leo Kokla and Jānis Osis by art historian Ilze Konstante in their turn mark a shift of focus towards Soviet-era personalities whose legacy is not always or even not at all dissident in respect to that state power, but can be considered as an integral part of the period's artistic specificity. Along with such additions, a number of equally voluminous books on individual artists have appeared, more akin to a synthesis between album format and collected articles or gatherings of archival materials, creating a mosaic-type picture. The obvious reason is that no art historian has taken up the subject in sufficient depth to write an extensive monograph, while an urgent need is felt to present that particular artist's legacy in an up-to-date publication. One example is a volume on the most pronounced representative of Fauvism in Latvian art, Ģedards Elias. Reproductions of works in this book are complemented with a biographical text, memories of the artist's relatives, correspondence of the artist, his notes and excerpts from diaries, etc. In such a model, it is almost impossible to avoid the analysis of art itself becoming somewhat secondary. Interesting comments were made by art historian Edvards Dorofejos in his review of this book, that was still his student's assignment. He dubbed the work, I quote, a biographical hypertext. consisting of different and independent parts, allowing the reader to move freely in this world of assorted information. Still, he pointed out that the volume falls short of a fully fledged monograph. That is a question to consider also regarding many other publications, whether that old-fashioned monograph as a consistent story created by one individual scholar on another individual artist remains a viable and desirable option, or that such a hypertext may seem even more in line with the contemporary modes of creation and dissemination of information. Similar in approach are numerous recent publications, sometimes more akin to an archival gathering, but often leaning more towards collected articles. Another example is a book on the versatile artist Ancis Cīrulis, who practiced applied and decorative arts, interior design, painting, and graphic art. Several authors have contributed overviews of a certain field of the artist's activity, ceramics, painting and painting and drawing, graphic design and posters, stylization and decorative art, and national and state symbols. While the approach seems to be justified with no single author capable of dealing with the artist's entire output, art historian Ilse Martinsson in her review has noticed, I quote, "a unified backbone is lacking," end quote. Namely, that separate entities of texts often seem to dissolve in fragmentation, repetition, and descriptive detailing, but the wider context of Cīrulis' interwar period aspirations for national style remain too vague. The format of collected articles, also incorporating interviews and artist statements along with catalogues of works, predominant in impressive volumes, for example, on Mākslas Balšķinieks, an interesting personality combining in his art impulses from Hieronymus Bosch to pointillism and surrealism, on painter and art critic Ugo Skulme, the adept of Picasso's neoclassicism in the 1920s, on James Skulme, the modernizer of Soviet Latvian art, who managed to evolve from naturalistic storytelling to bold painterly images of both universal and locally charged appeal, and Roman Sutta, the most active and versatile modernist painter, pedagogue, theoretician, and designer of the interwar period. A complete catalogue of works in the Latvian National Museum of Art, along with several articles by renowned scholars and the artist statements, was recently published in the internationally probably most famous artist of Latvian origin, Gustavs Kurcis. While a clear gravitation towards a pictorial format with reproductions as a dominant element shows in the voluminous books on canonical masters of painterliness in Latvian art like Boris Bēziņš, Edvards Grūbe, Imants Vecozols, Birut Bauman, and others. A new series of small monographs, classics of Latvian art, was launched by Neputnes Publishing House in 2014 with parallel texts in Latvian and English, largely aimed at educating both local and international readers on major figures in Latvia's history of art. Emphasis in these books, due to their limited scope, is understandably on the biographical facts, reproductions mostly serving as illustrational background, but some authors have reworked their more substantial researches to fit this reduced form and somehow to distill the most important part about these personalities. After this survey, one may wonder whether no substantial research has been published here on any representative of most recent so-called contemporary artists. This field is indeed much more unexplored. A recent series, Studio Library, also by Neputnes, presented a number of bilingual interpretations of some contemporary classics like Kristaps Dzelzis, Gins Gabrāns, Katrina Neiburg, and some others. Texts are complemented with an interview and a selection of works. But most comprehensive, however, probably is the book on Jānis Vinķelis by art historian and curator Inga Steimane, who has viewed this artist within the context of second-generation conceptualism or certain message art trend in Latvia, emphasizing communication at the expense of self-sufficient art object. But catalogue articles still surely remains a dominant form in the interpretation of contemporary art. Returning to the image of the artist that used to be either solitary genius or member of a national or social collective shaped by outer circumstances, what sort of a present-day picture can be glimpsed from these early 21st century monographs? It seems this contradiction has been largely cancelled out, admitting that absorption of numerous impulses serves as a basis to be reworked and recreated into something new. At the same time, recourses to interwar period national psychology, like peasant mentality, also surface now and then. In all, most studies present a wealth of factual information of various kinds, largely leaving the task of constructing a coherent personality for the readers themselves, if they are willing to take up this task at all. Thank you.